Beautiful. So Naras has a very long list of accreditations after his name. So long, in fact, that we had to abbreviate them to fit into the schedule. He has a bachelor's of science. He has a master's of science, I believe, in clinical care. He has a PhD. He has APD, ACAAM, ABAAHP, and this goes on. He has a background in research, PhD. These days, though, and I believe in the past maybe 10 to 20 years, his work tends to focus more in the nutrition space. He's been accredited the body doctor, the binge doctor. He has specialized in eating disorders, gastrointestinal issues, among many other more kind of specialized areas of nutrition. And these days, he focuses more on longevity, which is what he's going to be sharing today. Used to practice in Sydney, Australia, which I believe is where he's from, and now lives in Singapore with this family. And I'm missing so much in there, so I'll let you fill in the pieces. We're so grateful to have you here today.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me clearly, Brenna?
Yes, yeah, we can.
Yeah, thank you so much. I have to excuse the fact that my throat's a little bit raspy. Under the banner of longevity, tomorrow I turn 60, I know it's terrible, and in at least I'm living longevity. But in preparation for turning 60, I wanted to do something big, and so I just came back from Iceland, where I dived in the Arctic Circle, between the two tectonic plates of North America and Europe. But I think it took a bit of a toll on me. Anyway, yeah, I'm very, very excited to talk on this topic today, for partly because it's become there's a real intersection now. Just hang on 30 seconds whilst I get a mouthful of water so then I can talk nice and clearly. So yeah, my interest has moved, or encompassed now the concept of longevity. Part of the reason why I'm here in Singapore is the Singapore government understands that many of our societies now are becoming super ager societies, Singapore being one of them, and that in fact by 2030, Singapore is going to have a quarter of its population 65 years of age and over. And with that comes a whole host of health conditions. And one of them, obviously, is cognitive decline, mental health, etc. I was in a conference in Copenhagen last week on longevity. People are going to age in their organs and their physiological systems at different rates. And the brain is going to age just like every one of these other organs. And cognitive decline is very much linked with age. And it's such a big area and such a big field. I'm personally getting more and more interested in the brain and brain aging and dementia and cognitive decline. And as you would all know, sort of mental health is linked with a lot of these conditions. And interestingly, as Heather had just said beforehand, mental health is also associated with a whole host of lifestyle-related health conditions, heart disease, insulin resistance, etc. So the whole thing is bundled together. And then, of course, your eating patterns play a big role here too. So I'll introduce a term that I hadn't even really known existed before, which is the idea of mental health span. And this is kind of paralleling the idea of normal health span and longevity. Not that we're just living longer, but if you want to live longer, we certainly want to live well mentally, because to have your last 10, 15, 20 years in very poor mental health, I'd question whether that's quality living at best. So I'll talk today about a lot of the evidence that links nutrition with mental health outcomes. I'll talk a little bit about the mechanisms, and I'm always interested and always wanting to make sure that people get a real practical aspect to all of this. So again, these are things that I'm sure all of you would know very well. Mental health and depression is one of the leading causes of disability worldwide, and that you have an increased risk in mortality if you have poor mental health. So there's that link to longevity. Interesting that if you have mental health conditions and depression, your risk of dying unexpectedly is anything from around 50% more likely, and often that's related to undetected or untreated physical health conditions. And as I said, cardiovascular risk, diabetes are some of those. Poor mental health, it coexists with lots of other chronic health conditions. And so I hadn't known that the concept of mental health span has actually found its way into the research world. I don't think that it's a term that we've seen kind of from a marketing perspective yet, but we can define it as the period of your life where you're experiencing good mental health and well-being, not just physical health. And this then involves good emotional balance, good cognitive function, that social connection that Heather was mentioning just prior. And then if you're living with good mental health span, then anxiety, depression, cognitive decline is minimized. Now, of course, cognitive decline is a natural part of aging, but we can slow the rate of that. And you can improve your mental health span through lots of different modes. I'm going to talk today how nutrition plays an important role on that front as well. I think that I've got to put it into context. Nutrition is a good adjunct therapy. It's not something that you would do just as the primary. So we've got good evidence to show the role that nutrition can play with mental health. In 2017, there was a trial called the SMILES trial. This was quite a small trial. It's about 67 people with sort of moderate to severe depressive episodes. They were randomized, put into two groups. One had personalized nutritional counseling, and the others had sort of a social support. And they were looking to see for changes in depressive symptoms. So they followed a particular eating pattern. So again, just start thinking yourselves now about the types of eating styles that I talk about here today. It was a modified Mediterranean diet. So when people are eating in that type of fashion, quite a lot of vegetables, you're eating fruit each day. There's a focus on whole grains, good focus on consuming legumes and beans. With this particular eating pattern, if people are consuming dairy products, it's low fat. There's nuts, there's fish, and then in this sort of original Mediterranean diet, there's still a reasonable amount of animal protein. So some lean red meat, some chicken. Again, you don't have to eat all of these things, and eggs, and a focus on olive oil. And then rather than banning certain foods, it was sort of encouraging people to keep junk foods to a minimum. And so it was a fairly, as a small trial, but the outcome of it showed that about 32% of the participants in the dietary group achieved sort of a remission from these depressive symptoms, but also there was a reduction in anxiety as well. But this was really a bit of a landmark study. It was sort of a proof of principle study because it was the first randomized controlled trial to show that diet can improve depressive symptoms. And this trial started to allude to the pathways that might be involved here. And I just bring these up because I'll talk about them a little bit later. But the concept of having what's called reduced systemic, so total body inflammation, might link back to the gut microbiome, omega-3 and omega-6 ratios, and then, of course, all of the micronutrients that are linked to healthier eating patterns. It was a smaller study, and short duration. But it actually kind of started the term of something which they call nutritional psychiatry, which again is something I hadn't known about. It was followed up by the Healthy Eating for Life with a Mediterranean diet a few years later, which was a 6-month intervention randomized control trial program. Very similar eating pattern. There was just the only real difference was that the people that were involved in the study had additional amounts of extra virgin olive oil, and they were given cans of fish free of charge, which gave them, I suppose, more opportunity to adhere. And then again, the people that were in the nutrition group received not just dietary counseling, but they cooked together. So Heather was mentioning that social connection. So obviously something on that front was occurring. And it was a much longer study. It was a 6-month long study. And it had very, very similar outcomes to the proof of principle SMILES one. But their quality of life was improved. Stress symptoms and anxiety symptoms were also relieved. So I'm bringing all of these things up. And yes, of course, I can talk a little bit about sort of people's eating habits and binge eating habits. However, if we kind of look at all of these other key factors that link into mental health, anxiety and stress, obviously, if you have a tool that is able to mitigate them somewhat, then you might actually be able to challenge some of the negative eating patterns that you hold and perhaps hold so firmly. So these two studies were very, very important, and again already alluding to certain eating patterns that pay off. It then goes another step deeper. There is a diet pattern that has stemmed from the Mediterranean eating pattern, plus another type of eating pattern that's related back to sort of brain health, and this is called the MIND diet, and it's a merge of two sort of well proven eating patterns. So one is the DASH diet. So this was a hypertension and heart health diet, and the second was the Mediterranean diet. And again, this one is sort of focused towards neuroprotection. So now we're getting into the brain itself. This particular eating pattern, the MIND diet, brings in sort of 10 what they call brain healthy foods, and then they're also now actively restricting certain what they would label as unhealthy foods. Again, the eating pattern now for the MIND diet is even more nuanced than the Mediterranean. So there's more leafy greens, still lots of vegetables. It actually brings in almost prescriptive the addition of berries. There's nuts, whole grains, fish, poultry, legumes, olive oil, optional 1 wine a day, but they actually discourage red meat, saturated fats from butter and margarines, etc. Margarine, not saturated fat. Less cheese, so there really was a pull back on dairy products, not having pastries and sweets or minimizing them, and keeping fast foods on the lower end. And then with that diet, there's lots of different studies that have been used to look at various aspects of health. And just things, I think this is out of interest, following this MIND eating pattern has reduced Alzheimer's risk significantly. Again, so we're seeing that neuroprotective aspect to it. There's studies, recent studies, 2021 studies, showing that mood disorders are certainly less exacerbated from this eating pattern. And then now they're attributing the antioxidants from the berries and leafy greens, lowering oxidative stress, the high omega-3s, having an impact on neurotransmitter function. There are polyphenols in this type of eating pattern, which reduces neuroinflammation. And then people that are eating from this MIND diet are linked to higher brain volume, And brain volume shrinkage is linked with a host of different brain health conditions. And again, may end up playing a significant role in health span as well. So again, we're getting this concept of anti-inflammation. Now also, again, the idea of the gut and brain axis being pulled into place. When you're eating foods that are higher in fiber and higher in polyphenols, that's going to have an impact on our microbiome. We know that the microbiome can play back onto food, onto mood regulation. Omega-3s can have an impact on neurogenesis and synaptic plasticity. And vascular health also is improved when you have these kinds of eating patterns. And again, all of these things come back to brain aging and brain health. This sort of evolved towards the mind eating pattern, I think, is starting to set the tone of places where we could look to help our clients eat. And then I can flip it to the other side and say, well, what happens when you're eating in a manner that is more pro-inflammatory? And so a pro-inflammatory eating pattern is one that would promote systemic inflammation. And so now we start to move into a fairly standard American diet, which again, a lot of the Western world has copied, but this is higher amounts of refined carbohydrates, the introduction of ultra-processed foods, lots of red meat, lots of processed meat, trans fats, higher amounts of alcohol, and then when you're not eating as many fruit and vegetables, then you're missing out on a whole host of antioxidants, etc. And so when we take pro-inflammatory diets and look at them and say, what's the evidence? So there's a big 2018 meta-analysis that showed that people with higher what's called a dietary inflammation index, so it's sort of looking at their eating patterns and seeing that they're eating in that pro-inflammatory way, they have significantly higher risks towards depression. If you have a pro-inflammatory diet, anxiety, there's moving now to see some clinical trials to show that actually it does raise anxiety. It's not strong evidence, but it's emerging. And similarly, that this type of eating pattern is getting linked towards neurodegenerative decline. With systemic inflammation being a significant driver, neuroinflammation being a driver, oxidative stress, and then that gut-brain axis being compromised. And then finally, the marketing genius of ultra-processed foods and its implications show its head. So ultra-processed foods, they're very high in refined starches and sugars. You add in the hydrogenated oils, put in the colorings and the flavorings and the preservatives. So now we have something that is sweet, palatable, basically ends up being very much addictive. And again, we've got to be very careful on this front. And when we look at people's eating patterns that are high in ultra-processed foods, depression risk is increased significantly. There's, again, growing evidence linking it with higher scores for anxiety, cognitive decline, dementia, and it's everything that I had said before on neuroinflammation and the gut-brain axis, but just amplified. But the addition of the ultra-processed food is that it really gets into that reward circuitry hijacking. So when you've got hyperpalatable food, we get to overstimulate that whole dopaminergic reward system. And so here comes the increased risk of addictive eating and mood regulation. So, this category of food is just kryptonite for some people. And when you're eating in this kind of manner, or the more high processed food or ultra processed food you're consuming, then you're pushing out a whole host of other foods, whole foods, that are going to be protective of your health. So what's sort of the practical takeaway from this front First of all, I'm showing that it's our eating patterns are more important than just single nutrients. But let's tease out the individual nutrients that are at play here. And so there's some that I just wanted to hone in on. Uh, in these eating patterns, I've talked about omega-3 intake, and most people are going to get their omega-3s from fatty fish and other fish. If you are eating plant-based, you can still get your omega-3s. It takes a little bit more work. But if you're consuming a reasonable amount of grounded flaxseed oils in a day, some people may need to um, supplement with an algae-based omega-3. Walnuts have got a good source of omega-3, cold-pressed flaxseed oil. So you can get omega-3s through plant-based eating. Many will get it through fish consumption. But when people are consuming omega-3s, sometimes through supplementation, which I'll talk about later on, and with the omega-3 being higher in EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, uh, there is links here with benefits towards modest depression. So we know the mechanisms that are likely. Omega-3s reduce pro-inflammatory cytokines. So again, it has that anti-inflammation perspective to it. Also, omega-3s play a role in membrane fluidity. So they improve the serotonin and dopamine receptor signaling. They upregulate these things called brain-derived neurotrophic factors. So they can actually even be used as an adjunct in antidepressant therapies. So omega-3s are playing an important role. And as I said, we can get it from food. We can get it also through supplementation. Methylfolate and folate itself. So folate, again, that mind eating pattern had a focus on leafy greens and berries and legumes, etc. One thing that they all have in common is that they're all high in folate. Methylfolate is the supplement version of it. But what we've identified again is that in conjunction to taking certain antidepressants, taking methylfolate can help reduce symptoms even further. But again, we can do this through food, and it can be done through supplementation, or almost like prescribed supplementation. And there's good links between low folate intake and a poor antidepressant response. But again, if mood is dysregulated, if you're eating in a manner that really isn't highlighting these types of foods, then we have that constant spiral. The third one is vitamin D. And if we see individuals, or we can look at clinical trials, people with low vitamin D correlated with increased risk of depression, increased risk of seasonal affective disorder. And again, this one's quite easy, really, to correct. There are vitamin D receptors in the brain. Vitamin D regulates immune function. Vitamin D reduces inflammation. It supports serotonin synthesis, and we can be quite targeted with how we aim to achieve vitamin D status. And then the last couple are magnesium and zinc. So anxiety levels are linked with low magnesium, higher rates of depression. From a mechanism perspective, it supports neuroplasticity. It regulates the stress axis. And similarly, low levels of zinc, particularly in women, particularly in older people, linked with mood disorders. And that it, again, a little bit like some of the other things that I've spoken about, it can augment when people are taking antidepressants. And then the last one, which I wanted to bring in, is sort of this new way of thinking about probiotics, but they're called psychobiotics. And these are different types of bacterial populations that may play a role in brain health. And so here's that gut-brain axis showing itself again. And there's, again, emerging data now showing, and this is quite new, between 20 and 2023, where the introduction of these types of probiotics can reduce anxiety symptoms. It's very much strain specific. So there's one called Lactobacillus rhamnosus, Bifidobacterium longum. These are some that are linked. And again, it's about linking the gut-brain axis, and it's particularly linked to the production of short-chain fatty acids, which I'll talk a little bit about in a while. But the idea here is that when you're taking these psychobiotics, then the intestinal barrier integrity is improved. So we've got an opportunity here to use things like methylfolate and to bring vitamin D levels back to sort of correct levels and use psychobiotics as tools, as adjuncts to the nutrition that we're already doing. So the mechanisms, first of all, as I've said, the concept of inflammation and neuroinflammation, I'm discussing quite frequently here. When I raised the term of cytokines, so cytokines are immune signaling proteins, things like IL-6 and TNF-alpha and interferon. And when we have chronic low-grade inflammation, again, neuroinflammation is that, those cytokines are circulating at higher levels. And these cytokines can not only find their way across the gut barrier, but they can find their way across the blood-brain barrier. And so then we start to have a whole host of things happening at the brain level due to them being able to cross that. And that's the term of neuroinflammation. And neuroinflammation is linked to depression, it's linked to anxiety, it's linked to cognitive decline. So here is that tight link that I was talking about. And again, we know a reasonable amount about the pathways that are linked to all of this front. So when we have higher amounts of circulating cytokines, those brain-derived neurotrophic factors are less, so we don't get the same amount of neural pathway formation. We can have something which is called glutamate excitotoxicity. You can even have mitochondrial dysfunction. So when you're eating in a more pro-inflammatory manner, you're promoting the production of all of these cytokines. And then more of those cytokines, higher anxiety link. So again, the more anti-inflammatory your eating patterns, the better. So that's the first. Then we can look at mechanisms from a completely different perspective. So if you have insulin resistance, which is a precursor to diabetes, and it's part of metabolic dysfunction, and insulin resistance is very much a health condition that's prominent and can be stemmed from disordered eating patterns. Insulin resistance itself is also linked to a whole host of these cognitive declines that I'm talking about. And how this works is that usually we require insulin to help get glucose into our cells so that we've got fuel for our cells. When you are insulin resistant, our body doesn't respond quite well to that. And so the pancreas has to produce even more insulin. This leads to something called hyperinsulinemia. We end up with glucose dysregulation, metabolic dysfunction. And when you have insulin resistance, the links to depression are quite high, 2 to 3 time increase. And even if you have subclinical insulin resistance, which many people have, increases again your risk to anxiety and mood disorders. And so fortunately, insulin resistance can be tackled not just by nutrition, but also through sleep and exercise and caloric restriction, etc. But the link there between it and anxiety is strong. This is also where we sort of see the concept of type 3 diabetes. and the link between cognitive decline and insulin resistance. There's the connection between type 3 diabetes and Alzheimer's risk. So again, looking not just at inflammation, looking at different types of chronic health conditions and addressing them. You can say the same thing with heart disease as well. We can go to the microbiome as well. As I said, we used to believe that the brain and gut would speak to itself only in a one-way direction, from brain to gut, but now we know that the gut is sending signals back to the brain. It can communicate through neural pathways via the vagus nerve. It can communicate through hormones and through cortisol. It's communicating through the cytokines, as I had just said beforehand. And if you've got a nice balanced microbiome, which is going to be driven by high fiber eating patterns, which that MIND diet is full of, you're going to now have what we would call protective neuroactive metabolites that are now protecting brain health, and then that's going to help support better mental health. And one of the really big metabolites is something called short-chain fatty acids, which I want to talk a little bit about. Short-chain fatty acids like acetate, propionate, butyrate, they're all formed in the gut from increased amounts of dietary fiber. They can have a significant impact on brain health and mental health. When you've got good production of short-chain fatty acids, the lining of the gut is improved, which reduces the amount of product basically that can find its way across that layer into the bloodstream, which can compromise immune function. But also these butyrates, etc., help to preserve the blood-brain barrier too. And so when this occurs, we're actually able to reduce systemic inflammation. And so then again, neuroinflammation is decreased. So what's happening at the gut level can have a significant impact at the brain level. Which I think is incredibly powerful. The gut as well can play a role on insulin sensitivity. And as I said before, insulin resistance is a driver of all of these fronts. And when we see studies increase with diets that increase the amount of short-chain fatty acids, then we're seeing less depression, less anxiety, better cognition. So there's a lot here on this front. With how do you improve the production of short-chain fatty acids? As I said, more fiber will get you there. Having a diversity of fiber. Human beings are very, very good at eating the same types of things. And even if you're eating vegetables and fruits, quite often it's the same ones. We need more diversity. The eating pattern from the MIND diet has lots of legumes, which is a huge amount of fiber. Nuts, lots of fiber, so it's there in the eating pattern itself. Something that we don't see certainly in a lot of Western cultures are the fermented foods, but they're an incredibly good source of probiotics and prebiotics that can improve the microbiome diversity itself. That MIND diet specifically brings in the concept of having berries, and a big part of that are the polyphenols in berries that help to increase the production of short-chain fatty acids. And then again, if you're eating lots of ultra-processed food, it's pushing things out, and it actually is by default quite a low-fiber diet. So even focusing on nothing other than fiber alone can have a huge impact on so many different fronts. And then I just wanted to bring in one more, which is back to eating patterns and our circadian clock. Our circadian rhythms and circadian clock plays such an important role in sleep and sleep regulation, hormone release, metabolism, and of course, mood. And so when you're eating in ways that are compromising that circadian clock, all of these things are also then compromised. So if you're eating irregularly, if you're eating late at night, all of these things are going to cause significant disruption. And so looking at meal timing is something from a nutrition perspective that could really bear some good results. And again, we can look and we can see studies. If you tend to eat more during the daytime, that's linked to mood protection. Nighttime eating increases low mood, irritability, fatigue, shift workers, higher risks of anxiety symptoms, partly due to circadian misalignment. When people start to do time restricted eating or where they're, again, this isn't about caloric restriction, but about saying I'm going to try to eat within a certain time frame during the day, that's linked to quite a lot of positive health outcomes. So this isn't about restrictive eating and weight loss per se, but more about thinking about the timing of which you eat. And mood stability is one of the things that actually helps here and reduces anxiety symptoms. So when you align your meals to support sort of brain energy metabolism, reducing mood symptoms, this is something that's sort of a powerful addition to the toolbox. So again, we can look, as I said, across lots of different ways to drive this. A good way to think about this, sort of more from a clinical perspective, is how do you start? So first of all is number one, fix the base. So establish a baseline style of eating pattern. And if you're able to lend people towards a more Mediterranean mind style eating pattern, then by default, you're challenging the intake of ultra-processed foods and bringing the amount down. Plant foods are on the increase. You can take that to whole food plant-based or plant-forward eating patterns. If you consume fish, then it makes omega-3s a little easier. And then again, the addition of fermented food really becomes, I think, a very strong base. And when you eat like that, the polyphenols are there, the fibers are there, the short chain fatty acids are here. If your fish intake is on the higher end, we are supporting that anti-inflammatory signaling and the neurotransmitter regulation. And we're improving the gut microbiome from the fermented foods. So this is a good base point. We can go to that next tier, which is some of the things that I talked about before, the vitamin Ds and the other micronutrients, etc. And again, this is something that you can screen for. If you're addressing nutritional deficiencies, it doesn't have to be a stab in the dark approach. Take an evidence-based and clinical care approach to this, which is test, intervene, retest. You can find out people's vitamin D levels, iron levels, B12 levels, folate levels, quite easily through blood tests. And if people are deplete on these fronts, then you can either use diet or you can use appropriate kind of prescribed ways of working with supplementations to bring these levels to where you want them to be. So it doesn't have to be a hit and miss scenario here, but we want third-party tested products. You want to make sure that you know what doses you are using, and that, as I said, you're looking to see, am I achieving the amounts that we've said? So it can be very, very much prescriptive. But when you start to correct on this front, as I said, the nutritional deficiencies are being addressed over and above. So it's not really so difficult. Again, obviously compliance can be a little bit tough. And then that third tier is being a little bit more targeted. So if you've got what's called like an inflamed depression or significant anxiety or resilient to stress, then maybe supplementing with an omega-3 supplement, particularly one that's EPA dominant, might be worthwhile. If you're already having clients that are taking antidepressants, then talking with the primary doctor and saying, would an adjunct of methylfolate perhaps help mitigate symptoms even further? Looking at magnesium and zinc, blood tests aren't going to tell you good results on those fronts. You've got to get a better picture of somebody's eating patterns. But you can identify through people's eating patterns where they're likely to be lower in those. Blood test markers will give some indications on that front too. But again, it's something that you can look and can test. And then, as I said, targeted probiotics might be able to play a role in here too. So at least by having that sort of a tiered approach, what this is really doing is showing that we're using evidence-based nutritional psychiatry and that we're avoiding this idea that it's a one-size-fits-all approach. So just a couple of really, really quick things. Just some myths, I guess, more than anything else, but I just want to hit them short and fast. So we don't want to think that just taking pills is the way to help here. I think I've already shown here that the supplementation and adjunct therapies are sitting second and third tier down the line. Quite often people will throw out certain eating patterns and saying, I've got evidence to show that this is the way to go. I want people to be still somewhat careful when it comes to ketogenic eating patterns in the long run. One thing that we often see with a ketogenic eating pattern is that lots of gastrointestinal symptoms can feel quite good, but the fiber intake, for example, can be significantly low. And we also don't know through evidence what this eating pattern does for mood itself. Some people think that you can just target probiotics and that the gut-brain axis is the only place. Well, that's certainly not the case. The gut microbiome is still very much a bit of a black box when it comes to what we can do and what we can't do within there. And that's not surprising with 100 trillion bacteria or so. How much we can manipulate is we still need to be careful about. People might say that when they're eating lots of sugar, it makes them feel better and makes them feel happy, and that it's helping them with their mood side. Again, we've got to think about short-term versus long-term, and something that's making you feel good in the short term might be having a significant negative impact long-term. And then I just highlighted the gluten-free conversation. If you've got a real gluten sensitivity, if you've got celiac disease, then absolutely that's the case. There's not a lot of evidence to show that avoiding gluten has impacts on mood. And so again, it comes down to defining these things properly. Always need to keep an eye on alcohol. When people say that it's good for stress and it's helping me relax, we do have to remember it's a depressant after all. So it's interesting that the Mind diet still has that showing its way in there. And then also, you've got to be careful if you could say, the myth that all plant-based diets are best. You can eat in a plant-based manner and have it very healthy, and you can also be eating plant-based and it's dreadful, particularly if you're eating a lot of highly processed vegan and vegetarian foods. It's still an ultra-processed diet. So again, just think about food quality, emphasize whole foods, reduce ultra-processed foods. So what are the practical takeaways from the things that I'm talking about here? As I said, get that fundamental eating pattern of Mediterranean and Mind style eating patterns down, which can be done fairly simply and fairly easily. Once that part is established, look at eating timing. I think it's an important part. A lot of people's eating patterns are going to be compromised when mood is not where they would want it to be. If we can encourage eating more through the daylight hours and not having eating patterns that occur through the evening, that would work very well. The next is thinking about this concept of inflammation and how do you reduce systemic inflammation. It can come from your eating patterns, as I said, higher fiber and lots of omega-6s and lots of polyphenols are going to do it. But again, addressing all of those other health conditions. If someone's insulin resistant, how can we target that? That's going to play a role here on that front. Then the gut is that tight link between gut and brain. I talked about the short chain fatty acids here already. And again, the fibers, the polyphenols, the fermented foods are going to help correct those nutritional deficiencies, again, through blood tests, talking to people about their eating patterns and identifying food strategies and maybe supplemental strategies that will help them here. And then, as I said, we want to make sure that the things that we are doing here are adjuncts to whatever else it is that you are working with. So these are the dietary points that I wanted to discuss. As I've sort of got here, your eating pattern isn't the cure. It's a very, very important lever to extend mental health span. I just wanted to bring one additional point in. Okay, so this is a little bit off topic, but it's just something that I wanted to raise with respect to binge eating. So for the last, I've been speaking to clients on a one-on-one basis for 20 years plus. And I know that when it comes to addressing disordered eating patterns, there's lots of different ways that people can go about helping somebody. And in some respects, it's very similar to somebody who comes to see me and they want to change their body composition, or they want to reduce their risk of heart disease, or they want to perform better in a sporting environment. There's no one way that's going to solve that problem. There's lots of different ones. And there, with respect to a lot of binge eating, there is this one way of thinking, which is that there are no bad foods and that all foods fit, but you need to sort of define the right way, and that you identify an eating pattern that might be eating 3 times in a day with a certain amount of snacks and everything is on the agenda. I've found that for some people that works, but when we think about the ultra-processed foods that I referred to before and their link to sort of hijacking that sort of addictive circuitry, the concept of controlled abstinence to help reduce the frequency of binge eating is something that I've actually found to be very, very successful for some people. But again, maybe it's considered somewhat controversial, but there is emerging evidence to show that the kind of concept of controlled abstinence can perhaps be something that will work for some. And really, it's identifying foods that you know that are defined triggers and choosing a period of time of which you're going to try to not consume. So it's not something that people generally do on their own. They might do it in conjunction with their health provider, and they're almost defining it to a certain number of times for a certain period of time. I'm very interested to hear what people's thoughts are on this front. But when now for some, knowing that you're not going to be eating something can be a trigger in its own right. But if you knew that not eating it, but it's only for a week or for 2 or for 4 days, is that going to be enough time to be able to challenge some of that circuitry? So I was quite happy to see that this pattern is starting to find its way into the literature, because from a practical perspective, it's something that I've been seeing for quite some time. So I just wanted to raise that as the final point, just in case people wanted to discuss it. But that's what I wanted to talk to about today. It's not specifically on binge eating. It was a bigger picture, and also it is bringing in the idea that our eating patterns and our mental health is intricately linked to health span, which is intricately linked again to lifespan. And I would love to think that all of us are going to be living healthier and for longer. So preserving our brain and preserving brain health and brain aging and everything that comes along with that is key, because honestly, what's the point in doing all of this if your brain's not going to carry you to an older age in a good manner? So that's what I wanted to discuss. Thank you, everybody.
Mm, thank you so much. Um, I've seen some comments. We're streaming live on Facebook, and I've seen some comments come in, but I think most of the comments or questions that I saw come in, I think you answered pretty quickly after that. So, um, if anyone does have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments or raise a hand or just jump in. Um, One thing that I'll maybe ask just to kind of start out, you mentioned kind of the piece of cognitive rigidity, and then you kind of also mentioned how I'm not going to phrase this the best, but that some folks do better with a little bit more restraint, maybe around their food. And I wonder if when you're working with clients who maybe do better with a little bit more restraint, and how do you help them navigate that while kind of maintaining cognitive flexibility and not getting too rigid on things? Is that something that you encounter in your practice?
I do. I think where restraint can come in a good manner is framing for how long, right? So if somebody thinks that they're going to have to change something forever, the idea is just, and even for anybody, it can often be just that in its own right can be, you know, too much of a challenge, because then but if you change the discussion about saying, but you've had days you've been able to not eat or do these things or follow these patterns for a certain number of days in the past. Uh, what do you think you're capable of doing where you are now? And if somebody says, okay, then I think I can do this until Friday, right? So it's a whole different paradigm, because now what you're doing is you're trying to almost build a little bit of resilience, is to say, I'm prepared to suffer a certain amount of discomfort, but only until this point in time, right?
Mhm.
And when you do that, it I love this concept of resilience, because you can build it up in very, very small amounts. And so you set what you think that you can do. And if you don't make it, fine, dust yourself off. Maybe
Mhm.
you were a little bit ambitious. Maybe it's actually, can I make it till tonight, right? But then you can celebrate that win. The other thing also is that if you're prepared to sit with the discomfort for however long, you don't know how you're going to feel in 2 days' time, a week, or whatever else, because now you've got a little bit of momentum. And a lot of these 12-step programs, etc., are all built on momentum and time. Because I've been sober now X number of days. I have, all of the food addictions, etc. I have not done these things for a certain amount of time. And that in its own right plays a role. So you don't know how you're going to feel later. And maybe the tough times have already gotten, or the significant tough times have already gotten past you. It's almost like how I was feeling last night, wanting to cough, but trying my best to suppress it, and breathing in a particular manner and actually getting through that desire actually then got me to a place where I could fall asleep. Right. But you're enduring that period of discomfort. So I think that's how you word it and phrase it. And when by doing that, you're slowly building up resilience.
Beautiful. Thank you. Um, Yeah, I actually was just working with a client on something similar, and kind of like a technique that was offered to me was like the 2 week trial. And this would be, maybe not for impossible things, but like if it's just one thing, like what can you not have it for like 2 weeks? And it's something that was offered to me, and I found for myself, it was like 2 weeks was a good amount of time that it was like, okay, I can wrap my mind around this. And then by the time you get there, usually, you're having kind of more peace of mind without that thing, and you don't really want, it's almost like a trick because by the time you get there, you don't really want to go back.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it is, as you said, it's kind of that like the timing piece.
You want to replace it with something else, okay?
Yeah.
Because people who are smoking and quit have to have something to replace that. And ultimately, you want to replace it with something that uh, you certainly don't want it to be as damaging as the other, right? But
Yeah.
if you are replacing it with something else, at least you're not just leaving a great big hole of now I'm doing nothing, or I don't know what to do, or I don't know what to sip, or something else. So you've got to give something else.
Yeah.
Uh, and then when you have that, that helps a little bit too. Because also often the things that we resort to doing, we do it because at the time it feels good, right? And so when you take that away, then you don't feel so good. So you've got to, and it might be a second best, but at
Yeah.
least it's not bad, right?
Mhm. Yeah, beautiful. And then we've got a question in the live stream comments here saying, do you do anything around community support for nutrition or anything that you offer for your patients, I think, or your clients for community support around nutrition changes?
I don't. I'm a very much one-on-one type of person. So some people love groups and these types. I don't do that. So
Yeah,
it's not that it's bad or anything else. It's just not where it's not what I enjoy doing.
beautiful. Thank you. And then one, let me just make sure. Yeah, okay, that's all the questions are. One, maybe last question that I'll offer, and if anyone else has any, feel free to jump in here. Um, one of the things that we look at Nourished a lot are the kind of intersections between social justice issues and mental health. And so, kind of looking at the way that economic precarity and food insecurity and nutrition scarcity can lead to a path of kind of binge eating and mental health. And so I wonder, I mean, I know what I think is the answer to this, but this may be a leading question, but I wonder, if there are folks out there who want to use nutrition as a way to support their mental health, but maybe they don't have a lot of economic resources. Are there any suggestions that you might offer of, maybe foods that are less expensive, more accessible, maybe take less time to prepare, things like that?
Yeah, look, I think again, it depends on where you live.
Mhm.
So, like here in Singapore, for example, real food isn't that expensive. You can go to a supermarket and the government subsidize the food. So if you make the effort to actually go where the real food lies, it's not that expensive. And there are wet markets and things like that. Uh, I think often if you're prepared to seek it out, then actually buying just real food's not hard. Now, buying processed food is super convenient because you just use your app, right? And so it doesn't require a lot of effort. And so then people's thoughts are is that, oh, it's hard to get real food and all of these other things. But again, it comes down possibly to effort and also to looking. I would imagine unless you're in some really um, challenged environments, saying I'm just going to go and look for something is not going to be too hard. And even if you don't have good food prep skills, everybody's got a phone now and everybody has access to chat. And so, again, if you're prepared to invest the time, how much is three potatoes going to cost you, right? And then you learn how to bake a potato. That's one step better, right? But it would have been so much easier just to get Grab delivery to send you fries. So it's
Yeah.
it's it's the effort. I don't actually think the food scarcity and the economics is there. It's not expensive. You just have to find it first. In most circumstances, there are places where that's not true.
Beautiful. Thank you. Hang on one second here. We've got one other question. I'm just going to turn my camera off for a minute to keep the bandwidth. Really would love to hear your thoughts on developmentally learned food behaviors. sort of a nature versus nurture. So many children have these learned behaviors by school age. It seems to be fighting such an uphill battle by the time they are adults or diagnosed or seeking help.
Yeah. I think that, again, societally, this is something that's very difficult because even at home, the parents might be busy and stressed and looking to eat in a way that's more built around convenience. And so and then at school, it's the same type of thing. It's whether or not you're just looking for what's available at the canteen. And that's easier just to give the child a few dollars to put in their pockets, right? So it comes back down to sort of fundamentals and things that we've lost. Nothing, something as simple as just sitting at the table and having dinner together, right? Even if it's not every day of the week, but it's sometimes. And so, kind of coming right back to that. So, the responsibility we can perhaps put to the parent if you have children that's looking and saying, "What are my habits?" And if you're somebody that's grown up in that environment and you don't know any different, then it's going to be, at what point do you notice it? And then is it at age 15 or 20 or 30? But if you don't know where the problem is, you can't do anything about it, and you just think that it's normal. So it's really just going to be at what point the light switch comes on, and then what are you prepared to do about it? And it's a tough call.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Oh, we got one more. Let's see. Thank you. My husband, as a teacher, fights it even in elementary schools. Children are being offered candy for good behavior in 7 out of 8 classes, and it feels so broken for the system from the system to the homes.
Yeah, and look, I'm a parent. I've got two daughters, and one of my daughters just will do anything for candy, right?
Mhm.
And it comes in at school, and it's great. And I have to encourage some of the alternatives at home. But when you're young, you're gonna seek what you like, and you're not going to think about the consequences. Gosh, even as adults, we struggle with that.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you so much. So grateful to have you be here. And I know it's just starting your workday. So I'll put your email address in the chat just in case folks want to get a hold of you. I just pulled that from your slides and we're so happy, so grateful to have you be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Nice to talk with everybody.
Yeah, thank
Bye.
you.